Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Brewing the American Dream webinar presented in partnership with Accion Opportunity Fund and Samuel Adams. My name is Meredith Medlin, and I serve as the Director of Partnerships and Impact for Accion Opportunity Fund, a national nonprofit organization committed to providing affordable capital and business educational resources to entrepreneurs across the country. I'm so glad to have you all with us today. Thank you for being here. During this really uncertain time that can be frustrating for small businesses this year, we're proud to support entrepreneurs through access to capital and educational opportunities like this webinar. And we are so grateful to our national food and beverage partners at Sam Adams for their commitment to small businesses as well. As many of you may know, since 2008, Accion and Sam Adams have partnered on the Brewing the American Dream program with a singular focus of supporting food and beverage businesses with capital, coaching, access to networks, and promotional opportunities. This national philanthropic effort has provided over $44 million in loan capital, as well as best-in-class business coaching, completely free of charge, to more than 11,000 small business owners. As you can see, today's webinar is just one more example of Sam Adams' commitment to small food and beverage entrepreneurs. We're so glad to have each of you with us today joining this discussion. This webinar will address questions relating to distribution and wholesaling in an environment where your business operations might have changed recently. Maybe you've always focused on selling directly to consumers, but in this COVID era, you've realized that you want to focus more on selling with retailers. Or perhaps you're already connected to wholesalers and you just want to grow and strengthen those relationships. No matter your circumstance, we've got a fantastic panel of speakers lined up for you today. But before we begin, I just want to quickly go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, you should be able to view our presentation through the Zoom webinar tools window on your desktop if you've joined us by computer. Next, you'll see a chat function in the Zoom window's black toolbar on your screen. Please use that chat button to type in any questions you may have throughout the presentation. I'll administer a question and answer session following our discussion based on the questions typed into that chat window. We are recording today's webinar, so you can refer back to this information at a later time. I'll send an email containing a link to that recording shortly after the webinar concludes. In addition, once the webinar wraps up today, you will be prompted to complete a very short 2-minute survey that gives you a chance to tell us what you think of today's webinar. So please do take just a couple of minutes to give us your feedback about this presentation. And now I am very excited to introduce our panel for today's discussion. As you can see here, we've got 3 fantastic speakers with us, Ryan Kelly, Ellie Shepard, and Pam Holland from the Boston Beer Company to discuss distribution and wholesaling and really get a lot of fantastic questions answered today. Thank you all 3 so much for being with us today. Alrighty, so we are going to jump into our first question for today. We're going to talk with Ryan first about deciding how to distribute and what size distribution is best. So we can start with this first question up top, Ryan. What sizes or types of businesses are really best suited for self-distribution as opposed to working with a distributor?
I think it's generally in kind of smaller geographic footprints where your brand kind of has been, holistically like rooted inside a local community. So that's where I see, self-distribution to really work, as you can connect directly with your consumer. But in doing all that as well, you need to establish your brand vision and story with a goal of kind of owning your zip code or your neighborhood. Before you think about expanding further geographically. So that's where I see self-distribution kind of really working, and it's all going to be reliant on kind of the passion and brand vision that you have for your product. A distributor can help relay that story to customers, but they generally can't really create it. That's kind of really on you. So that's really, where I see that. And when you should consider going and using a distributor, it's basically when you're if you're, don't have enough resources to meet both your short and long-term business goals, all about really kind of thinking about where you want to be in the next 5 years. Geographically, and even more specific inside the geography. Do you want to focus on a specific class of trade, specialty boutique, large format? What type of trade events do you want to be involved with? Those are things that a distributor, in addition to a bunch of other things, can really help take a brand kind of to the next phase of its life, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great point, thinking about not only getting into more geographies, but maybe getting a higher concentration within a specific geography, getting in different kinds of retailers within, your own neighborhood or your own city.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really need to take a good look at where you're at, when you're starting out, where you're at with your brand in your kind of immediate area in a smaller footprint, and where do you want to be? What are the top 5 stores or retail locations that your brand doesn't currently exist, and what's keeping you from getting in there? And that's where a distributor could help you, open those doors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great insight. Thank you. So for our next question, kind of once you decide how to distribute, whether you're distributing with your through your own self-distribution or working with a distributor to meet your goals, on the next slide here, we have questions about finding that right fit and what the best volume, production volume would be for certain distributors. What can you share with us about how to find that right size?
I think one of the first things worth looking at is uh, if you're in a market where there's multiple distributors, which there generally are, where's your number one competitor? Where are the brands that make up 50% of the total volume for that category? What distributor are they with? And there's pros and cons to kind of both of those, but it's, if you're in an emerging category and one distributor in a market has the brands that make up 70% of the volume, well, you probably want that, they're a leader in that category and they're driving that at retail. So that would be, a good sign to go with them. But there's also, you can also, those tend to be larger distributors, and it's harder to kind of cut through the clutter and make your brand a priority when a distributor has a portfolio that might have 10,000 SKUs in it. So there's kind of those 2 avenues and schools of thought. A smaller distributor, you might be able to get more focus from the sales team of that distributor, because they don't have as many things in their portfolio. But generally, the more successful distributors are the ones that it's the power of their portfolio and their service, delivery, sales, and all of that are their 2 key kind of tools to leverage in a market and drive retail execution.
That's so interesting. I never thought about how competition potentially could work for you and also work against you with respect to who's distributing you. That's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, we've seen it over the years as we've kind of innovated and added new brands inside. Sam Adams is in the craft segment, but we added Angry Orchard as a hard cider. We had a cider before that, but we saw that the distributors that had the rest of the cider category, which was really small at the time, they already knew how to sell cider. So they were able to take a brand like Angry Orchard that had all the right, messaging and stories and dominate at retail with it, versus some distributors that didn't have cider and didn't have the the knowledge on how to sell it. They weren't able to execute with Angry Orchard to the same degree. And Angry Orchard, in its launch years was, we came out and grabbed 60% of the cider category and tripled it over 5 years. So, and a lot, but there's things that distributors are good at, and there's things that, we all have opportunities. But generally, when they have the brands that control a category, they can really drive long-term growth.
Yeah. So it'd be, finding that right distributor for your size that's already driving that growth can really help you take it to that next level. That's really interesting. Thank you, Ryan.
No problem.
All right. So then our kind of next question, moving through this journey of finding the right fit and getting the right size, getting the distributor that fits your goals, is now you got to get them to notice you and get that conversation going. So Ellie, I really appreciate you being with us today to talk through some of this about how to market your product to a buyer or a distributor or wholesaler that might be different from what a lot of our folks do right now, which is mostly direct to consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I would say the most important thing is really getting into the buyer's world. So instead of thinking consumer, you're thinking wholesaler. So understanding, what do they see the most value in, what's important to them, and then make sure you do your research. So I would say, firstly, really understanding the wholesaler's current portfolio and how your product will help that portfolio, how it's unique and what sets it apart. And then also, what is the competitive advantage with your product, whether it be flavor, taste, price, etc. Really understanding why it's important to the wholesaler. Second, really knowing your market. So who are the biggest competitors, both within the wholesaler and then out of house as well. Understanding if it's a chain market versus non-chain market. And in order to do this, you really, got to get out there, gain credibility, talk to the top accounts, understand what your top accounts would be, similar to what Ryan was talking about, but also understand what the wholesalers' top accounts are. Also, pricing, very important to wholesalers. So understanding the vision for pricing that allows the product to be competitive, but obviously allowing the appropriate margin for both distributors and retailers. At the end of the day, dollars talk, and that's going to be one of the most important things that they're looking for. Mm-hmm. I would also say long-term growth and commitment versus short-term focus. So they definitely want to make sure that you're in it for the long haul. And not only that, but what are you going to bring in addition to the product for resources in the market? And that can be a lot of different things, whether it's people, media, support. You definitely want to make sure that that's top of mind. And then finally, any early success stories definitely help. Local successes in the market are going to be huge when creating that selling story with wholesalers.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are all fantastic points. So once you kind of have all of that knowledge, you've done that research and you've got that information in your back pocket, what's the best trick? I mean, just to getting somebody to respond to that first piece of outreach, that first phone call or that first email to get that meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually reached out to some of the biggest wholesalers in Mass and Connecticut to get an understanding for what exactly they're looking for. So I broke it down into a few different things. One, just having that passion. Having passion sets you apart from different brands. Is the business owner passionate about the product? Are they focused on long-term growth that we talked about, or just making a quick dollar? And that's really important to the wholesalers. Also stressing the quality of the product. Is it of high quality? Does the business owner really care about the quality of the product? And the packaging and the design and all of that. Also, I talked about it a little bit before, but the support by talking about what you're going to bring to the marketplace, whether it's marketing, building a team, point of sale, all of that is really important to the wholesalers. So putting that first on the forefront. The investment. So is the business owner committed to continuing to invest in the product? And again, goes back to services, team, all of that. And then, finally, a tip could be a sense of urgency. So if you are, whether it be phone call, in person, sending an email, you really speak to the sense of urgency, how you're looking to move quickly. You could talk to the negative consequences that they might miss out on this opportunity. The likelihood of you getting a meeting sooner than later could be in your favor.
Yeah, that's a good tip for sure. And I think that piece about support is interesting because, as Ryan was saying, sometimes you decide to go with a distributor once your team is no longer able to get the product out by yourselves. But on the distributor's end, they don't want to be sort of out to dry they have to do everything from beginning to end. They want it to be a bit more of a partnership. So those pieces around what you're going to do to make their job easier are also really important, right?
Absolutely.
That's a great point too, Meredith. I think partnership is is key, and it's a watch out on both sides. Like if you're, you know, interviewing potential distributors and you don't get the feeling that they're looking to have, you know, a partnership, because that's really what it is, to drive long-term growth. You know, they might have different motives. Some distributors just want to take in brands just so they can have them, so their competition doesn't get it. So it's something to, you know, to just be aware of. But the ones that really look for the partnership and talk about that in your, you know, initial interviewing process, those are the ones that, you know, you really, that's a good sign. The other thing I would add too is getting them to notice you. Look for their people out in the market and in the trade. If you have your brand in retail locations, if you spend some time in that store, you can find out who that, you know, if it's a DSD brand where you know, there's a salesperson coming and calling on the store, you can find that rep, and that's a way in as well. Because I see it happen all the time where beer distributors will get new beer brands, and they get it through a referral, you know, inside their sales organization. It didn't even come in, you know, straight. It had to go up to leadership to get, you know, signed on, but it came in from the trade, basically.
Interesting. Yeah. So just really getting out there and meeting people can be really beneficial for sure. All right. So once you kind of have these pieces in place and you're using all of these tricks to get the response that you're looking for, creating that partnership model, now we're going to turn to Pam to help us make the most of that first meeting. So what would you recommend, Pam, for folks who are preparing? Maybe they, you know, finally got the distributor to call them back, or finally got that wholesaler to give them 30 minutes. What can we share with folks to help them prepare for that meeting?
Sure. Thanks, Meredith. So it kind of actually touches on one of the points that Ellie brought up, which was passion for your product, right? So one of the things that they should be prepared with is, what's your product story? Who are you, and what is your brand all about? And how did it all kind of come together? Like, we talk a lot about romancing like the beers that we sell, or the ciders, or the seltzer that we sell. So think about how you can sort of romance your products, whether it's, you know, what are the key features and benefits that make up your product. So, and when it comes to key features and benefits, you really want to be concise and think of it almost as like, what is the elevator pitch that best conveys the features and benefits of your product? A lot of times, if you're working through a wholesaler, they're obviously selling many other brands. And so it's trying to make it as easy as possible and remove as many barriers as possible for their teams to be able to confidently walk into an account or retail location and be able to quickly touch on the key features and benefits of the product that they're selling. I also think it's important to have an explanation of who you think your customer is, and where you want your product to live. And what I mean by like where you want it to live, I mean the types of stores that you want the product to be in, sort of what your vision is for that. And then even as like detail oriented as where inside the store you want that to be. We have specific brand guidelines that really talk about our brand standards, where we would want our beer to be positioned in a cooler, because that's where we see the most sales come from, or where we would want a key display of beer to be because it's a highly trafficked area. So really thinking about where in the store you would want your product, and why that may be the case. And I think Ryan and Ellie pointed this out, but as much knowledge of the distributor market, size, the big players, and understanding sort of like how their business operates. So in the alcohol industry, you have what we call on and off premise licenses. So there are liquor stores and supermarkets that sell an off premise, and bars and restaurants that sell an on premise. So really trying to gather as much knowledge as you can about that distributor's market ahead of the meeting. So that may bring up questions that you may have during the meeting, and help you better understand where your product can live. And then I also think it's a good time to, a good tip would be prioritizing the questions that you do have going into that meeting, because to your point, you may only have 30 minutes. So use that time to ask questions and get an understanding of what the key business drivers are for your distributor and how they prioritize your business. So you would get an understanding of where you would fit in. And understand how far they plan out, what types of things they plan for, and how they measure success. These are all types of questions that will put you in a position to better frame your product and better understand how they're going to take your product into the market.
All right. I think that's such good advice to go in, not only just trying to make your strongest sales pitch, but also proactively getting your questions answered so you understand what's going on too. And speaking of questions, what questions, we get this question all the time from small brands that are trying to get into distribution. What questions from the distributors can our folks kind of anticipate wanting to have answers ready for?
Sure. They're going to want to know what your distribution expectations are and how much volume you're expecting, what kind of pull you'll get from those points of distribution. So they want to know what stores you want to be in, sort of like what's the total number, but then also like how quickly do you think that product is going to sell through? They're going to want to understand what your strategies are for keeping up with supply. So, do you have stores now that you're already in where you're constantly going out of stock? What is your plan for that to be able to keep up with, if their team goes out and gets hundreds of new points of distribution, are you able to keep up with supply in order to maintain that? They're also going to want to know, and I think Ellie touched on this, what things are you going to do to execute in the market to help with pull and brand awareness? A lot of times distributors will say, we're in charge of distribution, you guys are in charge of pull. So they're going to want to know that, if there is a budget for you to help execute in the market, if there are people that are going to be out in the market selling your product, are you doing any sort of spends with media or events? All of those things are going to come into play in their decision making. And they're going to want to know, one of the things that comes to mind being in the beer industry is there a shelf life on this product? What happens if the product goes beyond shelf life? Who's responsible for that cost? So those are just some of the things that the distributor will probably have some questions about.
Yeah, I think those are all really important to think about for sure. All right. So next, we can go ahead and move to this last piece around once you have that relationship, you've gotten some of those initial questions answered. How, Pam, do you think we can best advise folks to maintain that relationship and keep it sort of a productive partnership?
Sure. I think that this is a really important question because it comes down to what does the wholesaler contact, what do they see value in? And so really getting an understanding of how that distributor makes decisions and what they place the most value on is going to help you maintain a productive relationship by demonstrating that value consistently. So you're always going to be selling back what your brands are bringing to the table. So understanding what's important to the distributor, a lot of the times it comes down to dollars and what they're making and their margins. And you sell the benefit of that back every step of the way. Share best practices and demonstrate that what you have done to help sales in their market. So what has worked for you that you can then take and give them as a blueprint for what they can sort of give to their sales team to go out in the market and emulate. And benchmarking success against maybe programs that you have set up for the brands that you have. So are there certain goals that you're trying to hit that you're consistently updating them of this is where we're at. And as a result of that, you've made these incremental dollars. I always like to say being transparent. So Understanding that they're your number one customer. That's how we look at it in Boston Beer. Our wholesalers are our number one customer. So you always want to be as transparent as possible so that you have that trusting relationship. And understanding how they like to receive information and how often can help guide your communication. A lot of times in distributors, there are many, many levels of decision making, and each level may be responsible for a different type of decision. So really it's about figuring out what is important to each of those decision makers and understanding how you can guide your communication to provide value to each of them.
And is that kind of something that is found out just by being in that working relationship for a while, or is that the kind of thing that sort of what decisions are made in what part of the organization that you can just sort of ask your contact to help you understand those situations?
I think in terms of sort of who's the structure of who's making what decision is probably something that will become apparent when you are joining a distributor. You'll meet different people that have specifically different types of responsibilities that your product may be part of. But I think from a specific person may have a very different agenda than another coworker who's also touching your brand. So I think once you sort of have the lay of the land and really understand, okay, the big decisions are made by these people, and I understand that because it's their title and it's what I've been told that they do. Really, the next step from there is understanding and developing a working relationship with each one of those people and really asking questions to try to understand what's important to them. And sometimes you'll get, depending on the communication style of the person you're dealing with, they might come out and tell you, and they might not tell you at all. So a lot of times it's time spent with these people. It's maybe it's not what they're doing, but what they're not doing that demonstrates the way they want to be communicated to and worked with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of like anything else. You just got to get to know your people and sort out what motivates them and what they need.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All righty. Well, thank you all three so much for walking us through this journey, starting at the very beginning, sorting out how you want to be distributed, and if you want to grow from self-distribution all the way through to making those relationships last once you've solidified them. So I really appreciate all three of you for taking the time to walk us through those things. So now, folks, it's time to answer your questions from the audience. So you can use the chat box and type in your questions, and I will ask them to our three experts here. And as you do that, as you type in those questions, I just want to quickly let you know about our next online learning opportunity, which is a workshop next Thursday, October 22nd, about e-commerce. So if you already have a packaged product, then perhaps you're selling online in addition to working on your distribution. So as you're typing in your questions, just also take a look at the chat box and use the link that I'm going to drop in there now to sign up for that workshop as well. So we can go ahead and move to a couple of questions. So the first question that we have here is about not getting a good feedback. So Ellie, I think this might be a good question for you around getting people to notice you. So we have somebody who has contacted a bunch of distributors and hasn't had a response, and is wondering if services like Range Me that maybe cost a lot of money just to have the meeting are worth that cost. I don't know if you have any familiarity with those kinds of services. And then kind of secondary about, paying for the meeting as one question. And then the secondary question being how to find out the right contact person for these major retailers.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as it relates to large companies like Range Me, I'm not super familiar, so I can't necessarily speak intelligently about that. But I would say as far as getting contacted from, getting the contact with distributors, the biggest thing is just getting your foot in the door, and that can be getting in anywhere. And so going to LinkedIn, figuring out who works in the company, even if it's not the person that you're eventually going to have the meeting with, who can you talk to that could get you in front of the person that you will have the meeting with. But their website, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you can find so much information these days just online, getting, the email addresses, phone numbers, and just trying to get as much information that way. Hopefully you'll be able to get your foot in the door, network enough to be able to get in front of the right person. So yeah, again, I can't speak to some of those companies, but I would say that would be my suggestion in trying to get in front of the distributor, that if one person, doesn't necessarily answer, just try the next person down the list and keep on going till you get some sort of contact.
All right. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And entrepreneurs are the perfect people for that, always resilient and continuing to just move down the list and find the person who can help. So that's great advice. Thank you, Ellie. All right. So next I have a question here, actually, Ryan, about some of the things that you talked about with finding the right size distributor. And those important factors about that Pam, I think you spoke to too, about how quickly things can move off the shelf and what the shelf life is. But Ryan, when you're trying to find the right size distributor in this really kind of volatile environment that we're experiencing right now, have you seen any distributors sort of increase their flexibility in what volumes they're willing to work with, or the timeline for like setting expectations for how quickly something is going to leave shelves, just because things are changing in consumer behavior so much? Have you seen any changes there or flexibility?
Flexibility in, I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand, in rate of sale off the shelf, or?
Yeah, rate of sale. I guess that's the right phrasing for it.
Okay. Yeah, I think wholesalers definitely, we started experiencing, 4th of July beer volume in March, and it's kind of continued on, for the rest of the year. So wholesalers definitely, when that happened, it's really hard to forecast, that kind of growth and not knowing what to expect. So they became much more focused on just supply chain management, as much as they could, and really kind of track, because they were basically running out of product and needing more, going out of stock. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I see that it says they're not having a finished product to show a distributor. I think, was that part of that question or no? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. You can answer that one too. Appreciate it.
Sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time. I think that you probably, selling a concept without a finished product, if it's something that's like disruptive innovation, like, or a brand new type of product, I would wait until you have the finished product, because if it's a concept, your idea could end up elsewhere. I think distributors definitely will probably be more willing to give you a seat at the table if you have a finished product. Because one thing that distributors want to know when they are meeting with you, where has the product been before they're bringing it on? Like, so some success stories, key learnings that you've had, like they're going to be looking for all of that as well at that time. So I think having a finished product versus a concept, unless it's a concept that is like adjacent to a brand family, like if like a subset of a brand where you already have a line and you've got something conceptual. But we generally, even when we meet with retailers too, like Hannaford wants full, the full package, the beer, the packaging, the UPCs, all that, and they want it roughly usually 6 months before it's going to be out in the market. So those timelines are tough. They're tough to kind of deal with, especially now in this climate.
Yeah, but that makes sense. I think, it's sort of human nature to be able to know what to expect. So having as finished a product, as much detail as possible, so the distributor really understands what they're getting themselves into. I think that makes a lot of sense for sure. And what about this next question here about what are some red flags to look for when finding that best fit in a distributor? I know you mentioned, Ryan, earlier taking that partnership approach, but any other red flags that might be a signal to look elsewhere if you see certain characteristics or something like that in a distributor?
I would kind of start in the market first, and kind of, if you can, get out there and just survey retailers and look at, understand, go into that retail account if you can, or even if you can look at, just scan data or whatever, but understand the wholesaler's portfolio that you're entertaining, going into a partnership with, and take a look at how that looks at retail, and how do they look against, the competitive wholesaler in that market. And even ask, you can ask, if you're in an independent market versus a chain, you could get a store owner and just, pitch them on your brand, and also say, and ask some questions about the distributor. And then you're going into that meeting kind of understanding, all right, they're preferred, they might be the preferred distributor in small format, stores, but then they're not preferred in, like Pam was talking about earlier, in the on-premise in restaurants. So understanding, you can learn a lot if you understand where your brand kind of fits in a market. You can learn a lot just by kind of taking a look at retail execution, if you understand the distributor's portfolio. So that's the one kind of piece of information you would need to know.
Yeah. All right. I think that makes a ton of sense. Thank you. All right. So I have one last question. Pam, I have a question for you. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of a story from your experience. This is something that I certainly have heard before from some of our entrepreneurs, and I'm wondering if you can share an example. You were speaking about distributors wanting to know kind of what consistent value or additional pull you're going to bring to that partnership and that relationship. So do you have an example of a time when one of the brands that you work on sort of demonstrated that value, or demonstrated that ability to pull in kind of a unique or interesting way?
Sure. So in terms of demonstrating value and sort of, bringing the value back to the distributor to show them what we've done. A great example most recently has been with the excitement behind the hard sparkling water, hard seltzer market. Going into brand plans last year and looking at the year ahead, seeing how impactful and how much growth had been in the seltzer market over the past year. And even outside of seltzers, but a lot of the new products that we introduced over the last year. And really one of the best things you can do, because at the end of the day, what's really important to these guys is being able to turn profit and make money, and really dollarizing some of the growth and dollarizing sort of what your brands have brought to the table. So, I guess it could come down to just the straight money at the end of the day, and what they're able to make off of your brand in a case where it's really successful and it sells well. Also, another thing that you can look for, I think Ryan brought up sort of spending time in the market and understanding the stores and the retail locations that are selling your brand. And perhaps what you've noticed is that where you've had a lot of success maybe doing independently, selling your product in a type of location that wholesaler as a whole has not had a lot of success in. So what that can show and demonstrate is that the product that you have can bring wholesalers into and break barriers to another type of account that maybe they haven't been able to reach yet. Or maybe it's a different type of consumer that they're trying to reach that they haven't been successful at doing so. So it's really about finding the sort of like overall value, about finding the opportunity inside of the wholesaler, whether it be dollars, whether it be where they're unable to reach, and demonstrating how your product can do that. And so seltzer was one example of, one being very profitable and new products being very profitable and sort of helping the bottom line of the wholesaler. And, for us with the merger with Dogfish Head, you could make the argument that that's a brand that brought us into other types of retail locations that maybe our distributors weren't really that great at getting into themselves. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a good way to think about kind of bringing that unique value, whether it's like you're saying, a super popular, highly profitable product, or I hadn't thought about that before about, say your product is selling really well in a certain kind of boutique or a bodega or something like that, and you haven't seen your distributor have success in that same kind of place. You can kind of get their foot in the door. That's a really interesting way to think about it. Thank you. All right, it looks like we have another question here. Oh, this is interesting about how somebody should give a partner pricing if the partner is acting as their wholesaler and their distributor. So I'm not sure. Let's see. So this says that the company works as the distributor and also takes on their mail order section. So how would you price that? Ryan, do you have any insights on that? That's kind of a unique relationship, right?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. So I guess it would depend if the product is being sold from the mail order section cheaper than it is at retail. Then that means, usually, I mean, some distributors expect that you're going to split a promotion cost. So if you were going to, take $1 off of a 6-pack of beer, usually you'll come to an agreement where you split that discount. So, the distributor can, recover 50 cents for promotional costs. But on a mail order section, again, if it's being sold cheaper, but the wholesaler, if it's mail order, all they really need to do is it's taking up their warehouse space. So they're kind of like a fulfillment house, but they don't have to, they're basically shipping it out by mail. It's not taking up space on the truck. A salesperson is not, going and calling on retail to get the product into the store. So maybe you do two types of pricing, but that's state laws are gonna step in on that. But it would make, or you work on a blended margin, and you figure out kind of what their margin requirements are for what they're distributing for you, and then what their margin requirements are for their warehousing, and then maybe you can blend it and then still give them kind of one cost. But I guess we don't do a lot of mail order. I would need to understand inside of, like, are you the only brand that they do a mail order for, or are there other brands? Like, is it a significant part of their business, like being a fulfillment house essentially? Because if they might view that as a more profitable, and might want to focus on mail order more than sales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely is a complex one. Thanks for helping us think through it.
Sorry.
No need to apologize. I think it's always interesting to see kind of these different structures that people
that's interesting.
come up with. Yeah, for sure. All righty. Well, I think those are all the questions that we have for today. So again, I want to remind folks that we're going to be hosting another workshop next week about e-commerce, so related to this topic that you might find helpful. So definitely check out the link that's in the chat if you'd like to join us for that conversation. And Ellie and Pam and Ryan, thank you again so much for your insights and for sharing your experience with us today. It's just so valuable. This is the kind of information that is really hard to find for small business owners. So I appreciate all three of you being with us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. And we will see you all next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.